Sorry, I'm just going to fiddle with this since we're sitting here because I have an 8 a.m. meeting tomorrow, so I might as well get my, there, I'm all set up.
Perfect. So who are you talking to at 8 a.m.?
My board fundraising advisory committee. We're having a whole conversation about membership in the annual fund, and thankfully, because normally we make an ask in addition to membership. We make an annual fund ask as part of membership, and so there's been a whole debate about whether or not we should do that this year. And thankfully, Matthew Dubbins did. I don't know if you saw this. He just published some research on. Yeah. So I just included that in my little one-page summary of the annual fund with a very strong, you know, we've got to ask, we've got to ask, we've got to ask. So.
Hello, Miranda. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect. So what do you think? What do you think we should do? Can you start the presentation?
I mean, it's up to y'all. I was probably going to have to get off a couple minutes early, but I'm interested in what you have to say. So it's, I mean, y'all are the presenters, so.
And Lori, shall we start then?
Sure.
So
okay.
I just wonder, since it's us and Miranda, I'm just wondering, and if we want to maybe just do like a 45-minute conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a great idea. And what do you think? Miranda, you okay with that?
I'm good with that.
Perfect. And the floor is yours. Shall I start the presentation?
Thank you.
Slides on.
Pardon?
Shall I?
No, I mean, I think why don't we just talk a little bit to,
okay.
you know, towards our presentation. So what I think is interesting, and Miranda, lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us. What's interesting is the Jewish word for charity is tzedakah. And what's interesting about that, particularly in this moment in time, is that the root of the word tzedakah means justice. So at this moment, a lot of times when Jewish people are talking about racism, you'll often hear the quote from the Bible, justice, justice shall you pursue. And it's worth noting that the root of the word most commonly used, most commonly translated from Hebrew to mean charity is the word tzedakah, which, as I say, has at its root justice. So the other thing I will note is I want to talk a little bit about how this band of the three of us got together. About after the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, I met Irshad because he came to our synagogue in a show of solidarity in his role as Imam, which was amazing and meaningful. And that kind of started a conversation between us about what was similar about philanthropy in Judaism and what was similar about philanthropy in Islam. And then from there, we started involving, I knew Lori, and so we all got involved. And we're interested in both the similarities and the differences. So I'm just going to say a couple more things, then I'm going to hand it over. We usually do this in order of when our faiths came on the scene. I think what's interesting about Judaism, in addition to this concept of justice underlying charity, which you will see in the US played out in a couple of ways. One is that Jews tend to vote much more to the left politically than similar groups at a similar socioeconomic status. So Jews tend to be fairly successful as a broad community, but tend to be very consistently left. And Jews as a community tend to fund social services a bit more relative to other groups. What I think is also interesting, though, in Jews and Judaism and charity is this whole notion of how justice permeates is also connected to the idea of life, which is part of why in this moment of Black Lives Matter, justice, justice shall you pursue is so regularly brought up as a quote. So one of the things that's common in Judaism is when you're making a donation to a charity, particularly if it's in honor of someone, you do it in multiples of 18 because the Hebrew alphabet is alphanumeric. So it's similar to Roman numerals where they're letters, but they also represent numbers. And so in the Hebrew alphabet, the word for life, chai, is also the word for 18. So Jews tend to give donations in multiples of 18, 18, 36, 360, 180. So there's a component in making a gift, both of a sense of justice and obligation, but also for pursuing life. So just at a very high level, that's just a little taste of Judaism and Jewish philanthropy. And the next religion in order of appearance on the world stage was Christianity. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lori.
Thanks, Anne.
So do you want the slides?
I'm okay to do the same because I'm thinking that if you're doing interfaith fundraising or fundraising for from the perspective of the Interfaith Youth Council, some of my slides wouldn't necessarily apply. But so I'll start with Christianity is about 2,000 years old. One of the slides that I have in my deck is a Jesus, what I call the Jesus face palm, which is a Jesus statue where he has his hand on his face, because politically Christianity is really diverse and divisive, like really. And so it's under the same umbrella of my congregation that's LGBTQ affirming and works with people who've come out of prison and is, from a different space than what's happening in the US right now. So there's a huge spread of Christians who are actually doing this a lot of the time. So that's discouraging in a word. So how that plays out in philanthropy is that if you were in the context of the work that Irshad described in terms of like the interfaith work and the systemic change that's being pursued, you're more likely to be getting the Christians on a different side of the spectrum. You're not going to be getting the real, I hate using the word evangelical because evangelical just means good news, and it's been appropriated to have a political meaning that is completely divorced from what the words actually mean. But so some of the slides that I have in my deck about etiquette would really only apply to those more conservative evangelical Christians and wouldn't apply to Christians who are on a more progressive side of the spectrum. One thing that we were talking in Minneapolis, we were supposed to be going to Baltimore, and the question that I was dreading is having to explain why Christians can be so racist. This is a little bit off topic for fundraising, but seems relevant to our particular moment. And I think Anne already knows this from being American in American history, but the reason there's a Southern Baptist, and just jump in, Miranda, if this is something you already know, that there's a Southern Baptist, and that was because the reason there's no Northern Baptist anymore. There's all kinds of them, but a lot of U.S. denominations split during the Civil War over over slavery, and they're not back together yet. So there is a real diversity of belief and spectrum of orthodoxy out there. So that is that the fundraising world and Christian fundraising is deeply polarized as a result. That sounds pretty encouraging, doesn't it? Some terrific interfaith work going on. I mean, the people that met at St. John's Episcopalian Church subsequent to Trump being there, was a really, really diverse group of people. Like, there's some truly fantastic stuff going on out there. Yeah, I'm completely off my deck, but there, I am encouraged. Christians will be shy to talk about money and are reluctant to have anyone say thank you often. There's some cultural stuff going on there. So some Christians might not want to be thanked for a gift to their church, say, but might be totally fine to have their name on the hospital. And I have met this exact situation. So recognition is something that you want to pay attention to, and don't assume one way or the other. You have to ask how they'd like to be recognized. And the same thing that with food, you know, do we eat this or do we? I mean, Christians theoretically eat anything, but again, there's a huge diversity of what's actually happening. All right, so that is a little bit of the very interesting cultural piece of being Christian right now. And I'll turn it over to Irshad.
Thank you, Lori and Anne. Miranda, can you tell us what's your connection to IFYC? Because both I'm a fellow for this year, the Interfaith Innovation Fellow. So my project is on the topic we are discussing now. So both Lori and Anne will be interested in more. They were asking a lot about IFYC. I have given my spiel, but it will be nice if they can hear from you as well.
So I'm an IFYC alumni. I went through Interfaith Leadership Institute while I was enrolled at Elon University. We had a Better Together group on campus. So that's how I got involved in IFYC, and then I've stayed involved as an alum over the last few years, just with some of the different stuff they've had going on online, as well as different conferences where there have been enough alumni present to have a meetup.
Great. Thank you so much. So for me, let me quickly show that slide. There's an important slide I want to show you. Let me see. We had a big deck, so I'm going to share the screen and okay. So the reason this topic, as Anne said, is important is because we wanted to talk to fundraisers. We wanted to tell fundraisers how important that interfaith or the religious motivations and values are important to donors. And there are, I mean, in Canada and also in North America, if you look at the data, it shows that people who are religiously active give the most money on average. Also by frequency, they give the most. At least once a week, if they go to the church or the synagogue or the mosque, they are givers, they are philanthropically very active, and they like to see that change in the community. So the reason why this diagram is important, we think that when it comes to fundraising is only about solicitation. Solicitation as a word means that asking the money. But in a donor journey, there are 4 steps or 5 steps, I would say. The first, we identify the donor, then we qualify the donor, then we go through the cultivation piece where we understand what the donor's needs are and to try to align their needs with the cause we are supporting, or they want to support. And finally, the solicitation piece, the asking piece is very, very brief, where we ask the money. After they have given the money, there's a larger piece, wrapped around piece called stewardship. That's where we keep on. We show accountability. We give them recognition, as well as continuously understand what the donors' motivations and needs are. The difference between US and Canada is that when I came to Chicago with the IFYC's retreat, I heard in Chicago in US, it's pretty normal to talk about the religion as a subject when you're having a donor conversation. It's pretty normal to write a letter about religious faith versus etc. But in Canada, in our sector, pretty much that is kind of we have our own reservations. We don't normally talk about it. But if you look at the donors, the cycle, but the cultivation, the stewardship are the largest cycle, largest time. Most of the time, we are interacting with the donor. So how can you leave out that most important part of their life and their identity and their motivation completely out just because of not being able to talk about it? So I will give one quick example. It's a beautiful story. um, 2 months ago when I was doing a workshop, and this is like a ISP's research on American Muslim philanthropy. We think, obviously, people who give to the churches and faith institutions are the largest. They give about 40% of the donation come to faith institutions. They did a survey on Muslims. Why do they give? This is the chart is about the US Muslims. But when I was doing the workshop 2 months ago, there were a lot of Muslim fundraisers as well. Muslim fundraisers came for all the mosques and Muslim organizations. I did a kind of a exercise for them to go through to for them to understand the donor motivations. I put them in the donor's shoes. I asked them to write down why do they give. The only condition of writing out that reason is that do not say that you are giving for the sake of God, for the sake of Allah, for the sake of Christ, for the sake of anything about your religion. So that is the larger, leave out that word. Think deeply on why you are giving what you are giving at that moment. Profoundly interesting answers came from people who are fundraisers. They themselves, why they give. This is very important. I quote this many times. One donor wrote down, because we did not ask them, we asked them to write down anonymously. One person said, I give to humble myself. Sometimes I feel arrogant and egoistic. Giving helps me soften my heart and become grounded. As fundraisers, we have to understand that people give for various reasons. So this is one of the powerful reasons we have to understand that although they give at a certain time, they have been asked in the mosque or the church or the synagogue, there are some internal reasons, internal motivation, which is connected to their belief and faith. Why do they give? So this is why we came up with the idea of talking about three Abrahamic religions, beliefs and motivations, so that people, fundraisers, when we go, we can connect them with their deeply held values and beliefs, and then connect with the donors in that level, instead of superficially connecting only with that transactional level. So now I will come to the important part about in Islam. In Islam, people give for the reason of zakat. Is also similar to what um, Anne said. Is zakat means purification. Zakah is an Arabic word. Purification is also justice. In Judaism, in zakat here is called purification of self and wealth. So that by giving, you're purifying yourself and you're also purifying your wealth. Islam also has another meaning in the Quran. It says that every wealth, if the rich person has a wealth, the poor has a right towards that wealth. What does it mean? What does it mean? It means that the distribution in this world has been arranged as such that people have to help each other. That my right is with you. My right is that right is with me, with the another person who has been given more in his life. So here it encourages people to share and then support each other. That's why the zakah is also obligatory. Whoever has enough money, they have to, is defined at 2.5% annually. Whereas the Shia community, you know the difference between Sunni and Shia. Shia community 1/5 is also defined. We also have something called sadaqah, which is a voluntary that that also include non-financial, and also we have the bequest and endowment, etc., etc. One last piece about giving, generational differences. In the past, zakat, which is I believe is almost about some billions of dollars zakat. Recently, I believe that one of the YouTubers, he did a video on zakat giving. It became viral. It went viral, and he gave some only about 3 minutes long. So in the past, zakat was only given to Muslims, but now people who are younger generation are envisions an equitable world. So even United Nations is asking zakat money from people. So they have a zakat fund, and they are recruiting fundraisers to tap into this huge pool of money. And then in the past, there's a high degree of anonymity. This is very similar to what Lori and Anne said. But now, interestingly, we see it with the younger generation. They also expect some kind of accountability. Anonymity means that we just give and forget about it, but rather they want to be part of that. Although they don't like to be recognized publicly, they like to hold accountable the institution they are donating to. So these are the two important things, and there are many slides. And so we will open up to the discussion we have. We are right now 7:10. Why don't we take about 15 minutes and we will wrap it up around 7:25? Is that okay, Anne and Lori?
Sure. Can I
Sounds
ask
great.
a quick question?
Yeah.
Reesor, do people, like, when I talk about tithing, which is a concept of giving 10%, which is an older generational thing, it wouldn't be necessarily the norm. And certainly it might be presented as an aspirational goal, but in practice, Christians are giving like 2%. But do people so people will say, well, is it net or gross, or is it before taxes or after taxes, or like, in other words, Christians are trying to wiggle out of it. And I just wonder if there's any parallels in your world.
Not really, because I mean there are two conditions need to be met. One is called nisab, and the other one is haul. Haul is that money, whatever the savings, that the net savings, and after all the expenses, that net savings has to be with them for 1 full year. If it was only for 10 months, then zakat is not obligatory upon them. If it's only full 1 year, they have to have that savings with them. Then comes the nisab. Nisab means that the minimum is 85 grams of gold. So that means if you have wealth which is over that 85 grams of worth of gold, that's around $5,000, right? So if you have more money, if you have $10,000 in savings for 1 full year, definitely you have to give 2.5%. But I said that zakat, unless you are a super rich person, the zakat amount people give is very minimal. 2.5 or 5,000 is a small amount of money. But when it's being pooled, when many people are pooling that in, then it becomes it creates a huge impact. That's why the sadaqah, sometimes people give more sadaqah than zakat. Sadaqah is the Jewish version of the obligatory giving. Sadaqah is in Islam is it's voluntary giving. So they give more money towards every time and any time. So it ends up as giving more than the zakat itself. Even people who are poor will give sadaqah.
So I think it's more the where I think you see things get complicated can be, we've talked about how synagogues have a dues system in North America because we can't touch money on our Sabbaths. So the way our congregations raise money is through an annual voluntary dues system. And you will get situations where people may, if the amount you have to pay is proportional to your income, people who, may claim, great poverty. But the Torah also tells us to judge favorably. It also tells us that if you judge someone, then you trade places with them before God. So if you're judging someone, then you're the one that's getting judged by God, not them. So, there's always the idea, it could be that, maybe someone on paper has more capability, but maybe they're supporting an elderly relative, or, they have other family obligations or other things you don't know about that may be preventing them from fully contributing. But on paper, Jews are supposed to give 10%, but I doubt that many Jews know that.
Yeah, sometimes knowledge like that tends to mysteriously get lost. I don't know what happened.
I also get questions during Ramadan, because Muslims give during the month of Ramadan. That's 90% of all the donations are given in the month of Ramadan, especially zakat, because we calculate that 1 year from Ramadan to Ramadan, the fasting month to fasting month. So in Ramadan, all the appeals go out. So during which time, as an Imam, I also receive very interesting questions from people exactly on the same line which you both are describing. If they want to evade, they ask all very interesting questions from me about the numbers and the calculations and all. This is what it says, and you have to give. It's an obligatory. And there are severe the words that scripture has been very strong, especially not in sadaqah but in zakah, very strong. So that means if somebody is evading zakah, then there are a lot of admonitions saying that you will face this and this and this. So because of that, people are very careful not to evade that zakah. Try to send it out as soon as possible when they get hold of that. Miranda, if you have any questions, you can jump in, or any observations from your own experience.
I'm just listening and learning mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from a smaller Christian denomination, so I relate more to that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's cool to hear where everybody else is coming from.
So I have a question for Lori and Irshad. Each of our traditions have at least one very major holiday season. Mm-hmm. And for the Jews, we've got the high holidays coming up in the fall. The Christians, of course, during this period of COVID, you guys had Good Friday, Lent, Good Friday, and Easter all happen. And you guys had Ramadan also happen. Yeah. And those are traditionally holidays in each of our traditions. We haven't had ours yet, but you've each had yours where traditionally everybody assembles. In the Jewish tradition, we have people we call twice-a-year Jews, and it's my understanding that Good Friday and Easter, at least, is one of those times where maybe a twice-a-year Christian might show up. So given that you couldn't assemble during COVID, but it's also a big time for when you are raising money for the church or for the mosque, how did it go? What did you do?
I would say that whoever were the early adopters won. That means that whoever went online and continued to provide the services, they won in the sense because online giving increased during COVID-19 because people could not come in. Whereas some traditional mosques, they could not raise money. Because even the imams and the administrators are not comfortable going online. They always wanted to have that pulpit and the small group of people or the big group of people in front to talk in front of them. So technology played a major role in determining and defining who the winner and who the losers are. Losers in the quote unquote. So people also zakat, they will definitely give, because zakat money they are going to calculate anyway, and then that 2.5% is what they know already. If it has been given, so middle income families, they know how much you are giving per year in your zakat, and definitely they will send out. So since only way to give is through online giving, they all made the donation online. Whereas some could not. That's what our experience has been. But in general, zakat is not the only money which will make a mosque sustainable. because we also receive sadaqah. In Ramadan, people give a lot of sadaqah. That we lost. For that, we did not see a lot of incentive in giving, because this one is obligatory, one is voluntary. The voluntary part, although we did a lot of, even Zoom fundraising, we did not see many dollars coming in. Usually in Ramadan, we raise about $50,000, which is enough for us to maintain our entire for a year. This year, it was around 20,000.
Wow.
Some mosques have a lot. I mean, we are still expecting the zakat money to come in, but sadaqah, it was lost. We received very less. Lori, your experience?
All kinds of churches that thought, oh, online giving is, we don't need to do it because we have this attachment to passing the offering plate. All of a sudden, their objections just vanished. So church, I even checked with Canada Helps, and they've had like 3 times as many churches sign up so far during COVID-19 as they would in a typical year. So the online giving has really picked up. Same with pre-authorized giving. The United Church of Canada has a pre-authorized giving program that they extend to any churches, and they were like begging people, like, just hold on, we can't keep up with all the paperwork. So all these things that I've been encouraging churches to do for years, all of a sudden churches can move fast if they want to. So that's been good. So it really depends, like what you said, Irshad, on whether the church was able to make those changes, whether they were able to get online, and whether they're able to facilitate online giving. And so in some sense, there is a digital divide there, like rural congregations where they literally do not have the bandwidth, where the internet service is just so poor, or they're really struggling. If you have an urban congregation, and again, it depends on the economic situation of the people in your congregation too. But generally, churches that are online, and the ones that I know of, and I've talked to a few, more people are attending online services than attended regular services, so it's an opportunity, like people that just, for whatever reason, it's a lower barrier, or now I've moved to another province or another country, but I can still attend my home church. So it's really been interesting to see that. So there's mixed results financially, but definitely in terms of people connecting with congregation, it's up.
Miranda, how is your church or the synagogue? Did they provide a lot of services online during COVID-19?
Yeah, so we moved services online, and it's actually been going very well. We're a small congregation. We were around 30 when COVID started, and so we've been growing. We're having consistently 40 to 50 people online.
Wow.
And then I actually run the youth programs. And very slowly but surely, our youth programs are also growing, and we've been doing those online. Giving went completely online. They had it set up beforehand. I actually started working at this church like 3 weeks before we closed for COVID.
Wow.
So it's been an adventure. But yeah, so we had some of the online giving set up, but now it's been entirely through the website, and they're looking at some of the other programs that are out there. I think they just set up some like text to give stuff this past week. But
will you continue the online work, virtual work after COVID-19?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Would you continue the virtual services or the live streaming even after COVID-19?
Yeah, we'll definitely continue live streaming. We were looking for ways to include live streaming before we went completely virtual. The youth programs, just because that's where I'm coming from, we'll probably look at a hybrid model where we'll be meeting in person when it's safe to do so, but also having the option for kids to join in via Zoom, whether, especially with the teenagers, we get a lot of teens who end up getting scheduled to work back to back with Sunday service, our youth groups, because our youth groups meet at the same time as service, or their parents are busy and can't drive them. We get all sorts of excuses. So it would give our teens an option as well to be able to participate from home if there's a Sunday that they just can't make it.
Nice.
And you also mentioned that about Michael Dogin, Rabbi, in your synagogue, wanting to maintain a hybrid model. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we're experiencing the same thing. I think this is everyone's hearing pretty much the same thing, that attendance is up, and certainly that's the case for us. Attendance is up in our morning services. We're a large congregation, but we're getting sort of 50 to 60 people, sometimes as many as 120, which, normally in the morning for a service that on location's going to be about 20 minutes, is less common. But, we talked about how, you're not battling traffic. So I think at this point, the thinking is like, people really like this. We're really getting a lot of engagement. And interestingly, we've heard both from people who are younger, who maybe have young kids saying, this is the only way I can do services every day, but I love being able to do services every day. And also we've got this 93-year-old who says, I hope you keep doing online services because I'm pretty much shut in. And this way I can actually come to services every day. And the reason I say she's so awesome is because she called all her 90-year-old friends and taught them all how to use Zoom. So she's tech support for that generation.
Wow. Any other questions you have, Miranda, for us?
I did have one. Yes. So again, I work with the youth. So do you all have different experiences and ways to maybe motivate people to focus on contributions to the youth programs, or that's something I'm noticing right now, is there's a big focus on tithing, but not to tithing to our youth programs. And it's not like the kids are tithing. They don't have jobs.
That's usually an easy one, to be honest. Yeah. That is usually an easy one to say, hey, the kids are going on you're going to now, but we're going to our national youth event or something like that, $5,000. That's I think it's this saying what you need, why you need it, and when you need it, and doing that on a regular basis and saying thank you. Churches usually have, that's usually, even if other areas are suffering, youth and kid programming is a priority for a lot of time.
So I would agree with Lori that usually youth programming is the strongest in terms of the people where they write, the people where it's the fastest yes. In terms of it, we're in an interesting time where I think people are so conscious of isolation that for the first time, I'm finding people are really thinking a lot about seniors a lot more. And I think there's also a recognition, there's a lot of, I think because so many of us have been housebound, it's giving us a better sense of what it must feel like to be housebound and a lot more empathy for that. But I would agree with Lori, generally speaking, I suspect this may be more of this moment, and moving forward as things loosen up and we're not at home so much, giving to youth programming, I think should likely pick up, because it's a pretty, youth are our future is a cliche. It also happens to be completely true. Irshad?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Anne.
Sorry, I was done. I was just going to let you have the last word.
Okay, Lori, you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that don't assume that people know you need the money. So it helps to have it as part of the service, like, because people without kids and youth might not know that that's actually going on. So to put that in whatever form of communication, whether it's part of your online service or a bulletin or an email or whatever, is super helpful.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Miranda's question. Recently, I got asked by somebody else, and they do great work with youth. When I did the fundraising workshop, she reached out to me, and she said that we are not getting. They only wanted to raise about $4,000 to publish a newspaper with the contribution of youth, and this is super solid paper. I read it. I said, why are you struggling? And as I was talking to her, I realized two things. One is uh, she expects the youth to raise the funds, right? They expect that the youth to go around and then just sell these papers and then promote it and then get the funds from their family members. Number one. Number two is that just because they are youth, because I looked at the ask amounts and it's very low, because the ask amount is there are youth are involved, and she said no, they can only afford to give this much amount of money. These are the two. I said this is completely contrary to what you are planning to do. Number one, youth are the program. They are part of the programming. So there should be your masjid, the more organization should be able to pick up the fundraising part for them, and also you have to get a lot of adults and donors involved. They only have to give the stories and anecdote, but there should be somebody else to raise the funds. Then only you can set the bar higher. Even 4,000 is just very minimum. But since you have set that goal based on what youth can afford, that's a wrong premise to start with. That you are asking them to do the work, and then so the mosque has to have a certain budget allocation. So the lesson for me, which I shared with her, is that first of all, remove that responsibility from the youth. Only ask them stories and then how they can motivate the donors. The fundraising part has to be at least the church or the mosque or the synagogue has to take one large chunk of raising funds for that program. Isn't that how it happens in your church, Miranda?
We haven't really had a youth program.
Ah.
So I am starting this program over again.
Oh, good for you.
Before, when they had a youth program, it wasn't. It was basically just Sunday school. So there weren't events. The kids weren't going to camp or anything. It was just Sunday school. So the only budget was the materials. So yeah, starting over and trying to build up something big and engaging for our youth to be able to participate and get to know more kids.
Yeah.
So a fundraising tip, and then I'm gonna love you and leave you because we always have a street concert at 7:30. So selfishly, I want to go to our street concert. But a fundraising tip I will have is that matching gifts are kind of fundraising magic. So if you can find someone, like Irshad's example of $4,000, if you can find someone who's prepared to give $2,000 and say that for every dollar someone gives, they'll match it, you will likely reach a goal very quickly.
That doesn't always, that doesn't, that's,
isn't that
on the
interesting?
church culture, that doesn't always, yeah. Miranda will know, but I wouldn't do that in my church.
Interesting. So tips are not always cross-cultural.
I would do that in any other context, but not at my church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great, and we are 7:30 now, the time. So as promised, we'll wrap it up. Miranda, it was a pleasure, and really, we'd like to thank you for joining in, and we enjoy the conversation. We can go on and on. These kind of discussions, I always very interesting. A lot of stories, not the presentation itself, and casual discussions goes on. We learn a lot, and we also understand about each other. great work you are doing, and I'm super thrilled to hear what you are doing, the small congregation and the new youth program. We wish you all the luck, and if you have any questions about fundraising, any dilemmas and challenges, please feel free to reach out to us. I will
Yes.
share the presentation with you later on today. Do we have your email address, Miranda? No, right?
I don't remember if it was part of a sign up, but I can.
No, because I did not have the sign up. That's the biggest mistake I did. If you can just put in your chat in the chat box, I will send you the presentation if you're interested. That has our contact numbers. Otherwise, I can also email our contact numbers. You can reach out to any three of us.
Yes.
And Lori is a specialist in church giving, and Anne is a synagogue giving, the Jewish philanthropy, and myself, I'm not a specialist, but I do work. So anytime if you want, and you can reach out to us. Okay. Great.
Don't listen to him. He's a specialist.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, and thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
guys.
Lori. Okay.
All right.
Thank
Great.
you, Irshad.
Thank
Have
you.
a good
Take care.
evening.
All right. Well, thank you, Irshad.
I'm trying to sign up. Okay, let me take a screenshot of that screen. Great. I took that screenshot. Now we are okay. Thank you so much, Lori. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.